Welcome, everyone, to our Tikkun Olam Volunteers Forum series on hunger and food insecurity. I'm Rabbi Miller, and this is a powerful experience for us to realize what is going on here in our own community in Southwest Florida, in Collier County, in South Lee County, in all the areas where we live and interact with each other. This series is organized by the Tikkun Olam Volunteers, TOV, our committee at Temple Shalom that works on issues of social action and social justice in our congregation and our community. And the goals of our forum series are to understand the Jewish values as they relate to our individual obligations to address our neighbors who are in need, to learn about the overall status of hunger and food insecurity in our community, to learn how it affects seniors, veterans, children, working families, and all those who are around us, to discover some of the programs that are being offered by our government, our schools, and nonprofits to address the issue, and to explore what we are doing already at Temple Shalom and how we can further participate in this conversation and be a force for blessing and for good, doing the work of repairing our community one little spark at a time. Today, we are joined by two remarkable speakers who are going to talk to us on hunger and food insecurity as it regards the seniors and the young families and children in our community. But before we hear from our two remarkable speakers, I want to take a moment to thank the members of our TOV committee with its chair, Don Belmont, and with Susan Hager and Ken Goldstein, who helped coordinate this series, as well as Liz Jaffe. Thank you to all of you who helped make this series a reality and are bringing these wonderful speakers and presentations to us as we learn more about what's happening here around us. The subject of food insecurity and need is something that is very much a part of who we are in the Jewish community, being mindful of those who need food around us, those who are struggling. And so we start off with a little text study now. On food insecurity. And we're going to start off with a text study on the subject of caring for the most vulnerable members of our community. We start off with this text from Deuteronomy. And as we go through this text study, you're welcome to unmute if you have a question or a comment, if you have feedback you want to give as we engage in our conversation with each other. We start off with this text. When you reap the harvest in your field and overlook a sheaf in the field, do not turn back to get it. It shall go to the stranger, the orphan, and the widow, in order that Adonai your God may bless you in your undertakings. When you beat down the fruit of your olive trees, do not go over them again. That shall go to the stranger, the orphan, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, do not pick it over again. That shall go to the stranger, the orphan, and the widow. Always remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore do I enjoin you to observe this commandment. So from reading this text, what stands out to you? What groups are identified here as being important, and how are we to relate to them? Feel free to unmute and chime in.
You have to take care of the needy people.
Thank you, Sylvie. So taking care of those who we might identify as needy or as the most vulnerable members. And Torah picks them out as three groups: the stranger, the orphan, and the widow. And if you think about it, in ancient times, those three groups had something in common. They were all displaced within society. The stranger was someone who was not a resident of your community, someone coming from the outside, someone who might not have the tribal connections of those who are already there. The orphan is someone who has no parents. They don't have someone who is watching over them, caring for them, maintaining them. And the widow, in a society that was dominated by male power, the widow was someone who had no citizenship, no power. They were not part of someone's household. They had no one looking out for them as well. So these three groups are there. And what's the rationale that's given by Torah for why it is that we should care about these three groups?
They don't have anybody to take care of them.
Thank you, Fran. So in theory, they don't have anyone to take care of them. And it also is a connection back to our experience that we had in Egypt, that we were once strangers. We were once the outsiders. We were once the ones who had no one caring for us. Therefore, we should have compassion, understanding, and feel some kind of empathy towards others in our own community who face a similar challenge. And so when we think about this, this is a very powerful piece. Now, this message of caring for the widow, the orphan, and the stranger appears many times in our tradition. The French scholar Emmanuel Levinas notes that the ethical imperative that we're talking about, the Chama Leibowitz, who's a famous Torah commentator, pointed out that the Torah cautions us regarding our behavior toward the stranger no less than 36 times. It's the most repeated injunction in the Torah. Empathy is an outgrowth of experience. Nechama summarized, we are bidden to put ourselves in the position of the stranger by remembering how it felt when we were strangers in another land. So what does Levinas note here about this injunction regarding the widow, the orphan, and the stranger? What does it mean to us that it appears so often in our text?
Isn't it because we've lived that in our past? I mean, we went through the same thing.
Mm-hmm. We lived in our past and went through the same thing. And listen, repetition is the mother of learning. You repeat something over and over and over and over again because you really want people to remember it. So in this case, it should stand out to us that in Torah, a document that's very often doesn't have a lot of detail to it. After all, we don't know, was Abraham tall? Was Moses short? What color was their hair? What did they like to eat? We don't know a lot of information, but 36 times we hear, care for the widow, the orphan, stranger, care for the most vulnerable in your society. And these issues of hunger are certainly in that realm of caring for them. After all, what was the injunction we were reading about? When you're gathering in your food, the food that you yourself have grown, when you have an extra sheaf, leave it on the ground. Let others who are more needy, who don't have what you have, come and take it. When you have extra fruit that's hanging on the vine, don't go pick it twice. Go through it once, leave it for them. The corners of your field at a time when they would mostly go in circles to harvest, you missed the corners. Leave the corners, leave the edges for those who are needy. They were very aware, even back in Torah times, of food insecurity, of being a real issue, hunger being an issue, and they're being vulnerable members of society. Now, let's be clear, caring for the vulnerable does not happen by accident. After all, we remember what happened to our ancestors with Amalek. If you don't know that name, Amalek is the great enemy of the Israelites in Torah. And why is he the enemy? Because we're told in Deuteronomy, remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. How undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march. And when you were famished and weary, he cut down all the stragglers in your rear. Who are the stragglers? When the Israelites are marching, who do you imagine were the stragglers who were at the back of the group as they were marching along?
Probably the old and the handicapped and, people with disabilities that couldn't keep up.
Liz, I think you're exactly right. It was those who had conditions or reasons that put them on the outside. Perhaps it was a health reason that they were walking slower than the others. Maybe they were elderly. Maybe they were young children. Maybe they were ill or struggling with something that put them in a vulnerable position. Maybe they were strangers. They weren't part of a tribal group that was marching close together. They were stragglers towards the back. Essentially, we're told to remember what Amalek did and to think of Amalek as our great enemy, because Amalek took advantage of those who were vulnerable, killed off those who were weak, didn't treat them with any sense of compassion, for they weren't warriors. And when the Israelites realized what was happening, they turned around and they engaged in full battle and defeated Amalek, warrior on warrior. But Amalek attacked the weak, took advantage of those who were struggling. We have a different calling. Our obligation is to protect the widow, the orphan, the stranger, to think about the elderly, those who are infirm, those who are struggling, and to be there to care for them, to make sure that the orphans, make sure that our children have protection. We see things differently because of our experience in Egypt, and we're reminded of that. And we strive to fulfill this divine act. We're told in Torah that we should be holy because God is holy. And we read in Psalms that you, God, give food open-handedly, feeding every creature to its heart's content. So one of the things we strive to do is to provide food and sustenance to all creatures, to all people, so that everyone is satisfied, that everyone is able to avoid this concern of food insecurity, of battling with hunger. That's an obligation to us. And we should note there, this text doesn't just focus in on God provides for the people of the covenant. God provides for the Israelites. God provides for everyone. And even within our own text, we're reminded by the rabbis, we have an obligation to help all in our community, not just those who are part of our immediate household or our neighbors. But we read in the Talmud, the rabbis taught, give sustenance to the poor of the non-Jews as well as the Jews. Visit the sick of the non-Jews as well as the Jews. Bury the dead of the non-Jews along with the dead of Israel. Do all of these things because of the sake of peace. That our obligation to help others doesn't end at our community boundaries. It doesn't end when we say, well, if you're not part of our congregation, if you're not part of our religion, we're not going to help you. We help everyone. It's our obligation to help all in our community, which is why it's so important for us to be having these forums, to be having this conversation about hunger in our community and what we can do to help all those who are in need. So understanding that those are the Jewish values that we are starting with, I'm delighted now to welcome our guests who are going to be joining us for our presentation today. And our first guest today is Elizabeth Alfaro. Elizabeth is the Director of Nutrition Services for Collier County Public Schools. She joined Collier County Public Schools in August of 2019 as the culmination of her passion for leadership and service. In addition to her graduate degree in dietetic administration from Utah State University, she's also a registered dietitian, having studied at Western Kentucky University. In the past 3 years, Elizabeth has been recognized for her progressive strategy in implementing the school district's first summer mobile feeding program, raising the standards of school nutrition, and creating an internal workforce partnership between nutrition services and the transportation department. Prior to joining CCPS, Elizabeth worked for the school district of Indian River County, where she was named Employee of the Year in 2018-19. Elizabeth's favorite part of being in her role are the people. She's a big believer that the most important thing to any organization are its people and their customers, who in her case just so happen to be between the ages of 3 and 18. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and unmute.
Okay.
We're going to spotlight you for your presentation, and I'll queue up your slides whenever you're ready.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for having me. Thank you for Ken and Susan for working with me the past few weeks on my PowerPoint, and I'm very happy to finally be able to be here today. So I'll go ahead and get started with the PowerPoint. Am I able to, oh, let me see. Oh, you got it up. Oh, I think there it goes. All right. So I'll just go to the next slide. As I mentioned before, I first wanted to talk about what we do as a department, so you have an idea before I get into some of the data. So Nutrition Services is a department of the school district of Collier County Public Schools. We are a federally funded program, which means all the money that we generate on our day-to-day gets put back into our program. So every year our revenue must match our expenses. This program was established in 1946, and our mission is to provide a nutritionally balanced, low cost, or this year no cost lunches, breakfast to the students each day. So next slide. This is just a quick snapshot of the program, its history. You can see when it started in 1946, the number of millions of children that we serve each year in the country. And in 2016, this was the last data. The program was serving 30 million children in the U.S. So we are far reaching, but still have a ways to go. I think the next slide. The National School Lunch Program, which is typically what people know us as, falls under the federal government of the USDA, but we also have other programs. And you can see this is our Twitter page in which we provide, it's called the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program, where students once a week get to try something new, a produce item, whether it's a fruit or vegetable that they may not otherwise have had access to. So that's just one of the many programs that the federal government subsidizes. Next slide. So getting into why we're here today, 63.2% of Collier Public Schools students are on free and reduced lunch. And that number, which actually came from the previous speaker, we're a little bit higher because of the pandemic, but we won't have that data quite yet for another couple of months. So I'll be able to give that to Ken and Susan as even though our fiscal year we are still in it. The last year has closed, so we'll be looking at last year's data. So next slide. So I really wanted to spotlight how COVID was and how it impacted the community and what we did as a department. So if you remember, almost 2 years ago, when the schools closed for spring break and the community and the nation shut down, we never stopped working Hair Nutrition Services. We returned to work. We worked over spring break. And we opened up 2 days later after there was school closures, which was quite amazing that we were able to pull that off with so many of the what was going on. But we did open up, and if you go to the next slide, what was impressive about that, I think, is we opened up 27 school sites. We were the highest county in the state of Florida to have that many sites open for students to come and receive meals. And in addition to that, we started for the first time ever, as I mentioned in the biography, we started our summer feeding mobile program, which means that we went into the community where the community could not come to us. So we set up tables outside. This was the first time we had been doing this, so we weren't really sure how to do it. But we were 6 feet apart and maintained social distancing. So while the schools were closed, the students in the community, actually anyone, they didn't have to be a student, they just had to be under the age of 18, could receive a meal for free at any one of the 27 locations. And they received both a breakfast and a lunch. So next slide. So one of the ways that we continue to address food insecurity is we thought, well, how, many of these students or children aren't able to have meals during the weekend. So through our program in which we were operating under, we were able to serve meals throughout the weekend. And I just love this picture. This came from Lake Trafford. You see on the right-hand side, the very last picture, we set up sort of an assembly line, and the employees just would go down it and build the bags. So when families came on Friday, they went home with 8 meals. Or excuse me, 6. They went home with Fridays, breakfast and lunch, but then they also went home with Saturday and Sundays. So this was a really great opportunity for us to be able to continue serving the community despite the school closures. So next slide. This was our first run at a mobile food drop-off. This is in Immokalee. This was the very first time we did it. We actually moved to school buses because our vans just couldn't, we didn't have the capacity to, as you can see, they're pretty small, and a regular school size bus is holds 77 passengers. So this was at in Immokalee. You can see there's already a line when we got there that the families were able to pick up meals for their children. So next slide. Go for it. Yeah. There we go. So it happens when you don't know how to share your own screen. So one of the great ways that we partnered with the community is in March when the community closed, we partnered with Harry Chapin to distribute the Harry Helping Kits, which were talked about in the last session. And they were boxes of 20 pounds of food. And every time a family member or anyone that was picking up food to take home, they received that day's meals, plus they received these Harry Helping Kits. And we did this, as you can see, we did this for over a year. And we distributed over 20,000 pounds of food to the community to take home. So next slide, please. So that was when, when COVID first happened. Moving into the new school year, what was different for us was that the USDA allowed all children to have meals at no cost. And this was something you see in the summer typically when school is not in session, and they just extended that, which was virtually unheard of at the time. But it really was a tremendous effort on their part to continue to feed the areas of the nation. So if you go to the next slide, I'll talk about what that impact was. So when we got into this, the school year and everything changed, social distancing became the norm. And as did, washing hands, we had to completely change our operation. We went from serving students through a typical, cafeteria where they would go through the line, but that wasn't possible. So we ended up having to change a whole new model. So the first thing we had to do was, you see these carts, this is at Cypress Palm Middle. We had to set up different kiosks areas where students could receive a meal, but in an area that was well ventilated and not populated with other students. So, and if Rabbi, if you just advance, it'll go through each bullet point. What we did, we procured all of these mobile pieces of equipment. We procured signage and stickers through the USDA. We bought, all the employees received face masks for PPE. We bought 600 stanchions was to make a queue. We needed some way to gather the data at each of these sites. So we purchased 150 laptops and scanners as a point of sale. We needed a way to keep the food warm. So we procured 55 heated holding cabinets. We needed a place. At the time, we thought we were taking money, so we procured 55 registers. We didn't know that was not going to be the case, and the students would, and the meals would be at no cost. But in total, we spent $1.8 million of our of non-food supplies. Now, I'll get to our budget in a second, but the district actually they funded this for us because at the time when we were making these purchases that summer, our budget had been affected by the lack of students, which I'll get to, but they did help us out in supplying this. And we did this for a year. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So in addition to this new setup that we're doing, we continued serving the weekend meals as we did during COVID. But what we did differently is we thought, how are we going to serve all of these families who are in need, who are experiencing hardships through our breaks? And we made the decision to offer meals during which the time the school was not in session. So there were 3 breaks. There was Thanksgiving, our winter break, and our spring break. And this was this picture. I took this picture and I was driving to Golden Gate Middle. This was the line of cars that had already been set, waiting. These families were waiting for us to open up. And I I was driving and taking pictures, so I probably shouldn't have done that. But what you can't see is like that the line continued all the way around, and it wrapped around the Golden Gate area. So in total, of all of the 3 breaks, we served 21,695 meals, which we wouldn't have been able to do. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see what that looked like on the back end. So on the left side, or my looking at the screen, each family that came in received an entire pizza, because we're feeding them for 7 days during the breaks. Thanksgiving was 7 days. The winter break was 7 days. That's how many we were allowed to provide per the USDA. And then this spring break. So each family went home with a pizza, and then this was their fruit. And then on the right-hand side, you see the students at the bus. These are the students that received the weekend meals, getting ready to go home. So that's what it looked like on the back end. I just love this picture. This is a family that from Village Oaks. This is what it looked like when they got home and they took everything out of the bag. So remember when they would leave for Friday, they got meals for the weekend. They got breakfast and lunch for Saturday and Sunday. This is what it looked like. So it's pretty, you see it when you're packing it, but then for someone to take it out and see what we've given them was just pretty amazing and rewarding. So that we were able to continue feeding the children over breaks in which they may not have access to food, which is something that has never been done in the history of the program. So next slide. So this is a little bit of our data when we look back at what we did. So in our brick and mortar schools, we take March 19th to August 16th. That was kind of our COVID summer. We served 721,000 breakfasts and lunch. Our mobile feeding, which was brand new for that year, it ended in July. We served 146,197 meals. That ended because our bus drivers, we didn't know at that time that we were going to be extended until the end of August, which is why you see a difference in the brick and mortar and the mobile feeding dates. Because if you remember, everything was changing that summer, at least on our end as we prepared for the new school year. So things were changing daily. On the right-hand column, we served, our data for that school year was 4.4 million meals. A curbside, which is we had to continue offering meals to families that were doing virtual learning or any child. We had to continue doing that per the USDA, and that was 145,000, and then our holiday meals. So it really is quite a lot. But then when you look at this slide, I think it's really interesting because we thought, oh, great, we did 4 million meals. But when you look at the participation, you see as the in the last few years, you look at what it is that actually participated. So 2020 and 2021 were particularly low, even though despite we thought, we served 4 million meals. And the reason for that is, which goes back to the last seminar, was access, availability to the food. So in 2020, students were held for breakfast. They were held in different areas of the campus that weren't necessarily near the cafeteria. So it goes back to access to the meals. So if that holding point was the furthest away from the cafeteria, then they were less likely to go and get breakfast. And then lunch was the same. So, what were the reasons that we had a decrease in participation? We had a lot of students missing school because of the virus. And then remember, if you were a close contact, you had to quarantine for 10 days. So we lost some of those students. and just, access and availability. And then we had a large group of students that were concerned, and their parents chose to pack their lunches instead of just simply, going through the line. So next slide. So as a department, how did this affect us? Because we are business at the end of the day. We need to remain financially solvent to continue doing what we do. We lost a huge revenue stream in our a la carte and our vending machine sales. We have higher food costs and labor costs because in a normal year, we allow the students to choose what they want. It's called offer versus serve. But in this model, we had to give them an entire meal. And that's just part of the USDA's federal guidelines. We paid for transportation that summer as we hired bus drivers. But the most spectacular thing is that during COVID, when all the employees were, when DeSantis there were school closures, is that we supported all the employees 100%. So what did that cause for us with the increase in product costs and the PPE supplies, that we lost $4 million in our revenue. So basically our entire savings account, if you want to call it that, was we used all of our budget to pay for the employees to make up for the increase in costs. And so going into school year this year, we had to come up with different budgets because we didn't know what the year was going to look like. And we needed to increase our revenue and decrease our expenses. So next slide. One of the things that that was an advantage for the families of Collier County and all over the nation was the Pandemic Ebt. So this was just like your meal, your benefits, but it was for the pandemic. What was interesting going through this process is having people who have never been on a meal benefit program call and inquire about this this benefit. So that was really interesting going through that. We just supply the data, and the Department of Children's and Families handle the issues of the benefits. So I'll just go to the next slide as I'm getting close to time. And so this was just a slide to sort of outline how they were eligible. So next slide is where we'll get to how you as a community can help. This year has been continuing in the same path. Students can receive breakfast and lunch. And what we found is that when meals were at no cost, our participation has been at an all-time high. And our profit has increased. In our December, we were up $300,000. So amazing how removing that stigma and that guideline, we've had more students eating with us. And next slide. These are our three biggest challenges, is just increasing enrollment in our school breakfast and lunch program. So just increasing more students eating with us, making the most of our limited funding because we are a nonprofit. And right now the supply chain is the biggest issue, getting food at the moment. And then lastly, what can you do as a group is exactly what you're doing today, is just continuing the discussion about food hunger and insecurity. You can always follow us on Twitter and seeing the wonderful things that we're doing, and that helps support us, because any traction that we can get is just spotlighting what we're doing, and then reaching out to our representatives whenever, if you feel that you want to have your voice being heard. These are, Nikki Fried is our commissioner, and we all know Ron DeSantis. And when volunteering is allowed back at the school district, is participating and helping us. And then, as always, financial gifts, since we're a not-for-profit. So in a nutshell, it's been It's been great to see all the students eating with us with these guidelines removed. And we're really looking forward to the remainder of the year to see, how our participation can continue.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that presentation. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us and to share all the information about our students. A number of questions came in. We're going to get back to those after we hear from our second presenter today. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Jackie Pfaffer. Hold on one second. Let me bring in the spotlight. There we go. The bright lights are on you, Dr. Pfaffer. Welcome. We are delighted to have you with us today. Many of us know you in our community. Dr. Jaclynn Faffer has been a visionary leader in the field of human services for over 25 years. She is a Master of Social Work from Tulane University and a doctoral degree in social welfare from Yeshiva University. She is the president and CEO of the Naples Senior Center at JFCS, a non-sectarian human service agency. Her past positions included Director of Human Services at UJA Federation in New York, where she was responsible for planning and allocations for all the many human service agencies. She was the Director of Adult and Geriatric Psychiatry and Social Work at the Brunswick Psychiatric Hospital, and she was the CEO Executive Director of the Ruth Rales Jewish Family Service of South Palm Beach County. Dr. Pfaffer has published numerous articles in juried professional journals on social work practice and administration and human resource development. She's the past chair of the Collier County Leadership Coalition on Aging, and a graduate of Greater Naples Leadership, where she serves on the board. And she was recently appointed as the chair of the Collier County Dementia Care and Cure Initiative by the Florida Department of Elder Affairs. It's wonderful to have Dr. Pfaffer with us now to share with us how hunger and food insecurity are impacting the seniors in our community as we touch these two ends of the demographic spectrum today. Just unmute yourself.
How's that? And I've asked Rabbi to handle the slide presentation for me. And if we could go to the first slide, Rabbi. Thank you. And food insecurity is defined as having limited access to enough food to live a healthy lifestyle. Next slide, please. In the United States, 5.2 million seniors, and we define that as 60 and above, were food insecure in 2019. And we also, during that year, saw unprecedented health and food access problems due to COVID-19. 1/3 of all seniors, and this is nationally, report trimming the size of or skipping meals completely. And they also buy less nutritious foods to save money. Next. A little bit about the demographic and socioeconomic factors. Food insecurity among Black seniors is more than double the rate of white seniors. Income is a strong driver of food insecurity, although not the only driver. 32% of food insecure seniors are below the poverty line. And in 2021, the poverty line for a one-person household was $12,880. Two-person household, which is what most of our seniors are if they're not a one person, is $17,420. 49%, and this number surprises people, were above the poverty line. For many, being on fixed incomes and Social Security is helpful, but for others, it is not helpful. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Next, please. Disability. It's not surprising that food insecurity rates are 3 times higher for people who are disabled than non-disabled seniors, and that we can understand in terms of when you're disabled, it's difficult to do shopping, cooking, and your activities of daily living become more difficult. During the pandemic, when we were forced to stay at home and many of our seniors were frightened to go out, it became even more difficult for them to access food. Housing. Senior renters experience food insecurity 4 times greater than senior home owners. Senior renters are more likely to be cost burdened. They spend 30% of their incomes on housing, 30% more on housing than senior homeowners. And what we see is that very often we'll find a senior who's paid off their mortgage. They are living in their own home. However, they don't have the money to purchase food. When you're renting, that becomes compounded because you are figuring in rent in addition to spending money for food. Next, please. Poor health can be a cause and a consequence of food insecurity. Disability and disease contribute to employment instability and income challenges. Inadequate nutrition can increase the negative effects of disabilities and chronic health conditions. It's not unusual in our food pantry, as well as food pantries throughout the United States, to see that the food that's available to seniors is not senior friendly. We have food with a high sugar and starch content, and we have food with a high salt content. A lot of that food is less expensive to get than food that is healthy and nutritious. And what that does is it increases the negative health impact on the seniors. And next, we see that senior food insecurity is associated with the increased risk of developing negative health conditions. They are 3 times more likely to develop depression. Clearly, as a former clinician, I can tell you that if someone is struggling financially to put food on the table, they're also struggling in other areas. And I think it's pretty obvious that they will begin to struggle with feelings of depression. 78% are more likely to develop asthma. When I got that figure, I did a little research on trying to find out why, but I could not. So if anyone who's listening has any insight into that, I'd welcome it. Next, please. We know that food insecure seniors consume lower quantities of the key nutrients than food secure seniors. 13.3% consume less iron, 9.7% consume less calcium, 9.2% less protein, and 8.5% less energy intake. Fairly obvious numbers. Next, please. Let's talk about food insecurity closer to home. In Collier County, it's estimated that 12,800 seniors are food insecure. They have available to them Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, formerly food stamps, and this is SNAP. Meals on Wheels in Collier County. There are a variety of food pantries. And in Collier County, there are, I think, 4 sites where the Elder Affairs Department has a congregate meal program. That is locally a county program, and some areas of the county, particularly Immokalee, they're fairly heavily utilized. Meals on Wheels, there are some issues with that. People feel that the food that they're provided are not that nutritious, that they're not tasty. And sometimes they take Meals on Wheels because of the human contact that the volunteers provide when they deliver the meals. Next slide, please. Now we'll talk really close to home, which is the Naples Senior Center Food Pantry. Our pantry has been physically closed since March of 2020 due to COVID. And that was because it's a small area and we could not allow at all for social distancing within the pantry. We have 225 unduplicated seniors who have received food pantry bags since March of 2020. Demographically, 92% are single, 74% are female, 11 are Holocaust survivors, 95% are on a fixed income of Social Security only. The average monthly income for our seniors using the food pantry is between $700 and $1,500. 90% receive SNAP, although 30% of those receiving food stamps receive only $16 per month, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Ironically, when I referenced earlier that sometimes receiving Social Security and government income is not helpful, the increase in Social Security in 2022 will lower the amount of SNAP payments that our seniors receive. So the seniors who use our food pantry are an interesting group. I would say 99% of them are people who never dreamed they'd be in this situation. They're people who at one point were at least middle class, maybe lower middle class. We have people who are retired firemen, policemen, retired teachers. They've outlived their income. They've lost a spouse. They've made bad investments. Their children have taken advantage of them. For one reason or another, they find themselves using the senior center pantry. And the statement that we hear almost unilaterally is that they say in one way or another, I was always on the side of the equation where I was donating to a food pantry or I was donating to a charity. I never thought that I would be the person who would be coming here to need food. We have people in the community who are pretty well recognized in the community, and we actually protect their privacy by having them come after hours or having them say that they volunteer. The food pantry that we operate is, when we're open, is quite different than any other. Number one, we require appointments. Now, why do we require appointments? Several reasons. One is to protect the confidentiality and the dignity of the person coming for the food. The second is we never want to have a food line like we saw during COVID or we see even before COVID. We don't want people lined up asking for food and waiting for food. We don't feel that that really helps them feel that they're being treated with dignity. It's also what we call a food pantry where it's a choice pantry. We don't just hand them a bag of food. They come in and they shop. And we allow a certain number of bags per family member, and we let them choose whatever they want. And we are not the food police. It's been questioned, why do we let someone who we know is diabetic take something that isn't diabetic friendly? It's a choice pantry. We would like them to be a little smarter in their choices, but we are not going to police their food. Next slide, please. I think I'm missing the slide. No, I'm not. Before we get to this, since we have closed our doors for COVID, we had a large number of seniors who we felt still needed our help. And these were the seniors who were not going out shopping. Wednesday was the day that Naples Senior Center had its hot congregate meal. And we would have upwards between 120 and close to 200 people having the Wednesday lunch with us on a weekly basis. to suddenly stop that program, we knew would create a hardship. Now, of that number of households, which probably that number represented about 100 households, not everybody came to us because of food insecurity. They came to us also for camaraderie, friendship, and to combat isolation and loneliness. So as soon as we closed our doors, we had a cadre of staff and volunteers call every single one of our senior center members. And we knew which ones were participating in the hot lunch, and we knew which ones were participating in the food pantry. Now, we also knew which of our senior center members used Wednesday to be the day when they went through the pantry. There were between 50 and 60 households of seniors who were food insecure and who we knew would be missing the hot lunch that we provided. So from the day we closed our doors throughout now, today, Wednesday, every Wednesday, we delivered a hot lunch to between 50 and 60 households because they were missing the hot lunch they had with us. In addition, we delivered food pantry bags, and we pretty much knew, our case managers knew what foods they selected. We delivered food pantry bags to go along with the hot meal. So in that way, we were working with them to try to address food insecurity as much as we can. Now, there was another benefit with that, and I know I have a couple of volunteers on this program. In addition to the food that we provided that volunteer who, for some of our seniors, was the only other person that they saw during the pandemic. What we did, the volunteer would call and let them know they were approaching the house. The volunteer would leave the bag of food and the hot lunch at the door, back away, and then have a socially distanced conversation with the senior. So if we were to do a study as to which was more meaningful, the food or the friendly volunteer, I would guess that, of course, nutritionally, the food was more beneficial, but emotionally, that human contact was just as valuable. We have some challenges in the senior center food pantry, as many food pantries do. One is offering senior nutritionally friendly food. Whenever people ask what they can bring, we always say, if possible, think about low sodium, think about sugar-free, think about diabetic friendly. And when we get donations through Harry Chapin or some of the other food banks, we either get donations or we buy them. We also try to select those items which are senior friendly. We try to have items such as Boost available. And we try, when we were open, to have fresh fruits and vegetables available too. We also have a challenge, and I know Temple Shalom and Federation was very helpful to us. The day before we closed for COVID, they did a drive for us on stocking personal hygiene supplies for seniors, the adult diapers, for example. These are not covered by SNAP, and they're necessary. So not only do seniors have to make a choice as to whether to spend the money on medication or food, they also have to make the choice as to whether to spend the money on personal hygiene supplies or food. Lastly, it's to help destigmatize food insecurity, enabling more seniors to reach out for assistance. This is probably the most difficult and yet the most important way that you can help us. And as Elizabeth said, having a forum like this is really the first step in that direction. There is nothing more difficult than asking for food or admitting that you need assistance in putting food on the table. It's difficult for everyone, but it's particularly difficult for someone who finds themselves newly in that situation. When our case managers do an intake, they ask initially about food insecurity. And initially, they're always told everything is okay. By the time the relationship develops and the case manager can be a little more forceful about it, she can get them to admit that, yes, they do struggle with food insecurity. So there's research which is obvious about why it's so difficult to ask for food. It makes people feel they're less of a person. We all have stereotypes of what poor looks like and what it means not to be able to have food on the table. And these are the stereotypes we have to do away with. I will never forget when we first opened the senior center and we brought someone in to see our lunch, and this was someone from a funding organization. And at that time, when we first opened our doors, 60 to 70% of our members were at or below the poverty line. When this person looked around the room and saw tables of nicely dressed, clean people, he said to me, "They can't be poor, they don't look poor." To which I said, "Tell me what poor looks like." And I will just end by saying, that's the area where we all need to work together, whether it's for children with families or for seniors, to destigmatize what it means to be hungry. Thank you. How can you help? 50 households have received a weekly hot lunch since March of 2020. They continue to do so. You can donate food to the pantry. You can donate your time to the pantry for hot meal delivery and stocking the pantry. You can sponsor a group or neighborhood food drives. That's something that happened during the pandemic more than it did before. I think for two reasons. I think neighborhoods wanted to find a reason to reach out to one another. And number two, they recognized that we needed food for our seniors. So that's one way. And of course, we always accept a financial gift to support the food pantry. I'm preaching to the choir. Temple Shalom has, since I've been here for 10 years, has been one of the key supporters in the community of the food pantry, and we greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pfaffer, for that very informative discussion and leading us through what's been happening with the seniors in our community. I know we have a number of questions that are out there, so I'm going to put you both in the spotlight with me now. And I thought we'd go through some of the questions that are out there, and I'll kind of move them back and forth between the two of you so we can get a sense for it. You know, some of the questions come in, though, that are related to each other. There is a question I've seen from on both the side of the students and on the seniors of how does one avoid there being a stigma when it comes to the students? How do you avoid creating a stigma when it comes to who's receiving those weekend meal packs and who's getting a quote free lunch or free breakfast? And when it comes to the seniors, how is it that you're able to put them in a position that they know that what they're doing is going to be kept anonymous and that they themselves should feel comfortable coming to ask for help when they might have been the ones before to be providing help to others? So I'll throw that out to both of you, and we're gonna do Q&A for about 10, 12 minutes. So you can keep your answers to about a minute or so, and then we'll get through some more of the questions. Elizabeth, why don't you start off with this one, and how do you address creating a stigma for the students?
Well, we have laws in place that prevent over identification. We cannot disclose a student's eligibility status to anyone but the Auditor General. When we were giving out meals, it was all volunteer, and we would just set up the tables and families could come up. So we're very careful in ensuring the confidentiality of the families involved.
As I mentioned, we require appointments and we do home deliveries now. But that is the way we can physically protect their feelings about being known to the community. The other way is to talk with them about how they got into the situation that they got into, and that it's through no fault of their own. Spouses die, income runs out. Unfortunately, people get taken advantage of, and we try to normalize it as much as we can.
Thank you both for those. And it certainly is a difficult challenge to try to normalize it for both the seniors and for the students to understand that there's nothing wrong in receiving the assistance that they are getting. A question has come in wondering, when you compare what's happened here when it comes to our seniors and when it comes to our school system, how does that compare to how other communities have been responding to the challenges that we are all facing right now?
I can just say that our sister agencies similar to ours throughout the United States have responded in a similar fashion. Helping to give out food is one of the most rewarding things we find people to say that they can do. I'd like to say what we do is a little more unique and special, but in reality, I will share that in all of the communities I'm aware of that have an agency similar to ours, our seniors have been taken care of.
It's good to know that's happening for our seniors. And how have other school districts behaved in Florida compared to what we've seen here in Collier County?
We, well, with COVID, we saw that Collier had the most opportunities for families to visit a site to receive meals. We know that through discussions we had during the course of COVID. Right now, everyone is under the same guidelines, so we're doing very similar operating models. And next year, it looks like we'll be continuing this same model for right now.
So similar, but I imagine that it sounds like Collier County has gone above and beyond probably what was even there as the basic standard and what you've been able to provide for our students.
Well, that could have been my naiveness, not knowing, never having done this. We didn't talk to anybody over the course of the time that we were planning. We just thought, how many places can we physically open with the people that we have, that we reach every pocket in the community. So to me, it was just a logical move. But other districts may not have had the staff to support that. But I can tell you that Collier had one of the highest number of locations considering the amount of students.
That's very helpful to know. Thinking about not just solving the problems that you're facing today, but the bigger picture, a few questions have come in asking about what we can do on the advocacy side. If we reach out to our local or state or even our national leaders, what kind of messaging should we be providing that can address the issues that you're each facing when it comes to our seniors and to our children and young families?
You know, this is on a national level, and it's so ingrained into the years and years and years of giving food assistance to families and seniors. But clearly, seniors get penalized when they make maybe $30 more a month. They get penalized by getting fewer benefits. And I think relooking, and I'm sure they do this on a regular basis, relooking at how they calculate what a senior or what a family with children can receive in terms of the food allocation, and maybe at some point broadening the SNAP coverage into the personal care items. But I'm not optimistic, and I'm an optimist.
You're a visionary optimist. It's how we have the wonderful senior center that we do. Elizabeth, what would you ask for us when we reach out? You mentioned to reach out to Nikki Fried and to Governor DeSantis. Mm-hmm. What kind of message should we be providing to them that would be helpful for our students and our families?
Well, there's two things, and one I'll tag on with Dr. Pfaffer is to increase the amount of money on the Pandemic EBT per day. It's around $6 and some change, which is they've increased this year, but I don't think with inflation that it's enough to cover. And then supporting universal free meals for the school lunch program, reaching out to via email, or Nikki Freed, our commissioner, would be the first place I would go to, and just supporting that initiative, and to be a permanent change, not just a temporary one to provide us as we go through COVID or the pandemic.
Very helpful information to know. A question has come in for both. A lot of these have been very relatable for both ends of the spectrum. A question has come in wondering what you're able to do to provide for those who have specific food needs. Wondering about for those who might have religious needs, as far as we think in our community about keeping kosher or avoiding pork and shellfish or not mixing milk and meat, but also even those who have particular dietary needs for health reasons, those who might have celiac disease or other things. How can you both provide for the food that's out there, the food insecurity, and addressing the hunger, while also meeting those specific needs?
In terms of the health needs, we always ask that when we do an intake, and we will do a special request or a special purchase for those needs. We can't always give them as much variety as what they would normally get if they didn't have food insecurity. But we do try with that. And that's particularly true with diabetics and people with high blood pressure, but we have had celiac disease as well. As far as dietary restrictions during, because you keep kosher, I keep a kosher home. You know, I wish we had a kosher butcher here in Naples, but we are very careful, and we do have a few people, survivors, who keep kosher, to make sure that what they are given is appropriate for keeping kosher.
Thank you.
So as for the children, we will accommodate any special diet or specific foods to accommodate religious preferences. Being the dietitian, I'm playing that role right now as we're needing to hire. So if anyone knows of anyone, but I will create a customized specific menu to each child that comes through, and I'll work with each of the families, and I match that to the other children's menus. So even though there may be a celiac or lactose or soy allergy, they will receive a similar meal to their friends. So we reduce the stigma.
Wonderful. Well, one final question for both of you, and I think this will be helpful for us, given that this forum is part 2 of a series that we have, Understanding Hunger and Food Insecurity in Our Community. What relationship do you have to the other organizations that are addressing issues of hunger and food insecurity in our community, be it Harry Chapin Food Bank or Meals of Hope? How do they interact with your organization, and how can our work with them maybe be beneficial to the whole community?
We work very closely with Harry Chapin. We also work closely with the Midwest Food Bank up in Lee County. And it's been a relationship that's very, very long-standing. We also work closely with the Hunger and Homeless Coalition when we have someone who has multiple needs who are beyond what we can provide.
Thank you. And Elizabeth, in the schools?
We work together with other organizations in the community. There are a number of us on the food policy organization with the UF Extension Office. So we try to tie in other entities, but in something like what we're doing today, where we can meet and discuss with what others are doing. I just learned that I could go volunteer at the Naples Senior Center. I didn't know things like that. So I think having these types of forums are very provide valuable information for us. But as a district, just something like today just further strengthens those ties that we can bring together as a community.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for being a part of our food insecurity and hunger forum. Dr. Pfaffer, Elizabeth Alfaro, you've been wonderful in providing us information about how we can impact the lives of seniors and children in our community. We are all the more aware after your presentation of the need that exists around us. And it is now our obligation, our duty to make sure that we go out and we feed those who are hungry, that we leave the corners of our fields, that we are conscious of how our actions can help others. And we look forward to partnering with you and finding new ways that we can enhance the work that is being done and support those who are out there. Thank you both very much for your presentations. This brings to a close our formal presentation. We're going to stop our recording.